Between 1968 and 1969, the Zodiac Killer terrorized Northern California with a string of brutal murders and cryptic messages that left both law enforcement and the public baffled. Despite numerous suspects and investigations, the Zodiac Killer was never caught, and his identity remains a mystery to this day. In this video, we'll take a closer look at the Zodiac Killer's crimes, his letters, and the various theories surrounding his identity. Welcome to YARO Crime. Today, we'll be taking a look at the story of one of the most famous unsolved murder cases in American history. Before we continue, please like the video and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on our latest videos. Now buckle up and prepare to enter the mind of the killer as we explore the case of the Zodiac Killer. To give you an idea of how horrible the Zodiac Killer was, all we have to do is read you a few words from a letter written by the Zodiac. In this letter, the Zodiac said, "I like killing people because it's so much fun." Sadly, despite murdering over 37 people, the identity of the Zodiac has remained a mystery to this day. The name, the Zodiac, was chosen by the killer himself, and this was how he addressed himself in letters he sent to the police. Although the earliest murder attributed to the Zodiac Killer took place in 1968, it is believed that this cold-hearted murderer had been active for many years prior. The 1968 murder was that of a young couple named Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday, and they were murdered on December 20th, 1968. On that day, the couple had driven out to Lover's Lane when a man approached their vehicle and shot David in the head. Betty managed to get out of the car and run, but she was shot 5 times in the back as she tried to get away. After some months had passed, the Zodiac took responsibility for the murders and backed up his claim by sharing details of the crime that only the murderer would have known. A gruesome murder also happened 5 years earlier in 1963, and it is believed that the Zodiac might have been responsible as well. Linda Edwards and Robert George Domingos were high school lovers who skipped school on Senior Ditch Day to go out to the beach. This was the last time they were seen alive. Robert's father found the bodies after getting worried when his son failed to return after a long time. When he got to the beach, he was confronted with the gruesome sight of both his son and the girlfriend tied up and murdered. Linda had been shot 9 times and Robert 11 times. No one knows for sure who was responsible for these murders, but this may or may not have been the work of the Zodiac Killer. The murder of 18-year-old Cherry Josephine Bates in 1966 is also suspected to be the action of the Zodiac Killer. Cherry was stabbed multiple times, and her throat was slashed with such force that it almost decapitated her. It was confirmed, however, that the Zodiac Killer was responsible for the attack on 19-year-old Michael Maggio and his 22-year-old girlfriend, Darlene Ferrin, in 1969. The couple was sitting in their car at Blue Rock Springs in Vallejo when the Zodiac shot both of them, resulting in the death of Darlene. Michael fortunately survived the shooting. After murdering Darlene in cold blood, the killer called the police and told them exactly what had happened. He ended the call by saying, "I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." The Zodiac was referring to the murder of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen in 1968. One of the most gruesome confirmed murders committed by the Zodiac Killer was that of 20-year-old Brian Hartnell and 22-year-old Cecilia Ann Shepard. Brian and Cecilia were lovers, and while relaxing at a lake in Napa County, Florida, they were approached by a man in a hooded costume with a Zodiac emblem sewn into it, who told them he was a prison escape searching for help. He overpowered the couple and bound them with clothesline while they were on their back. He then stabbed Brian 6 times in the back before turning to Cecilia and stabbing her 10 times. Incredibly, Brian actually survived. After stabbing the couple, the Zodiac went to their car where he scrawled in pen some information about the other murders. Sadly, Brian Hartnell wasn't able to provide much information to the police about the identity of the Zodiac Killer. There was one incident when the Zodiac was almost caught. This was when he shot 28-year-old taxi driver Paul Stein in the back of his head from his taxicab in San Francisco. He was still around, as the police arrived on the scene and only managed to get away because the police seemed to believe the crime was committed by a black suspect. They soon realized how wrong they were when the San Francisco Chronicle received a letter signed from the Zodiac. The letter read, "I am the murderer of a taxi driver." To back up this claim, the Zodiac enclosed a piece of the blood-stained shirt Paul Stine had been wearing that night. Some people, however, saw a man near the cab on the night Paul Stine was murdered, and thanks to the information they received, the police believed they now had a good idea of what the Zodiac looked like. The Zodiac would send a letter saying the image the police had was a bad version of him, as he had worn a disguise that night. The Zodiac killer committed many more murders, and we can't cover them all in a single video. So let's discuss the Zodiac's letters. The letters from the Zodiac were written with terrible handwriting, and he would often send a cryptogram, which is a coded way of sending a message. The Zodiac's cryptogram was usually a block of letters and symbols. The last letter received from the Zodiac was on January 29, 1974. This letter did not contain any confessions or information, with the Zodiac simply writing that the movie The Exorcist was a great satirical comedy. He also left a symbol that has not been explained, and this was the last time anyone ever heard from the Zodiac killer. But there's still one question we must ask. Why was the Zodiac killer never caught? Some people believe that the police knew the identity of the Zodiac killer but couldn't arrest or prosecute him due to insufficient evidence. The main suspect in the search for the Zodiac killer has always been Arthur Leigh Allen. Arthur was also the only suspect the police gained search warrants for, with several officers stating that they believed Arthur was the Zodiac killer. The police investigated Arthur Allen for almost 20 years, and they had a lot of leads. Matching footprints at the murder scene, bloody knives in his car, a positive ID from a survivor, a knowledge of sufferers, being seen close to one killing, reports from people claiming that he had bragged about killing and talked about naming himself the Zodiac, a history of abusing children, and an apparent hatred of women. Despite all these leads, the police said they just couldn't find enough evidence to convict him. On the other hand, Arthur's handwriting did not match that of the Zodiac, and neither did his DNA match the Zodiac letters. Arthur Leigh Allen died in his home in 1992. Richard Gaikowski was also another suspect in the Zodiac murders. He had a link to the sufferers that were sent, was mentally unstable, and was a good fit for the sketch. His friends, however, have provided solid alibis for some of the murders. Could it have been Earl Van Best Jr.? Earl bore a striking resemblance to the Zodiac killer sketch, and his name seems to appear in the ciphers. Some people believe the Zodiac killer may have been the Unabomber, Theodore Kaczynski, but this is the least plausible of all the likely suspects given the Unabomber's intellect and MO. The only connection the Unabomber and the Zodiac killer seem to share is a fact that they both wrote to newspapers to share the details of their horrifying crimes. Ricky Marshall is also another suspect. His only connection to the Zodiac, however, is the fact that he owned a typewriter and liked the same kind of movies as the Zodiac. I think it's safe to say that he's not the guy we're searching for. Could it have been Lawrence Kane, a mentally ill man who knew how to code, whose name may have been in the ciphers, and who was the colleague of one of the victims, or Ross Sullivan, another mentally ill man who was a good fit for the sketch and was close to the location of the murders? Strangely enough, the Zodiac once mentioned the opera The Mikado, an opera composed by none other but Gilbert and Sullivan. Who do you think the Zodiac killer was? Let us know in the comments below. Please do not forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.